The SIM swappers don't care. If they can spend 20 minutes and take $3,000 from you, that's a pretty good payoff. But at this point, with all these data breaches, it's made it so easy that everybody's become a target at this time.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin time chain is 852632, and the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. Today's episode is Bitcoin Talk, where I talk with my guest about Bitcoin and whatever else comes up. Today, that guest is Mark Kreitzman. Mark has over 20 years of experience in enterprise cybersecurity and is currently the general manager at Afani Secure Mobile. Efani is a cybersecurity-focused mobile service provider that offers secure plans on Verizon and AT&T networks. But unlike Verizon and AT&T, Efani protects you from SIM swap attacks. You may have heard of some high-profile Bitcoiners like Mark Moss, Preston Pish, and Jeff Booth all get SIM swapped fairly recently. So I thought it would be a great idea to do an episode devoted just to this. If you do not know what a SIM swap attack is, that's okay. Don't worry, you're about to find out how it works, why you should care, and how you can protect yourself. Mark also gives some great general tips on how to lock down your digital life, which I think you're going to find really useful. I've also partnered with Afani, so if you want to get $99 off your plan, go to afani.com/walker, and the promotion code will automatically be applied. That's EFANI.com/walker, or just go to the show notes. Speaking of show notes, if you'd rather watch this show than listen, head down to those show notes for links to watch on YouTube, Rumble, and now on Nostr via Highlighter. But if you're like me and you prefer to just listen to your podcasts, I highly recommend you check out fountain.fm. Not only can you send Bitcoin to your favorite podcasters to give value for value, but you can earn Bitcoin just for listening to this and other podcasts. And if you're already ahead of the curve listening to the Bitcoin Podcast on Fountain, consider giving the show a boost or creating a clip of something you found interesting. Finally, if you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, hit me up on social media or through the website bitcoinpodcast.net. Without further ado, let's get into this Bitcoin talk with Mark Kreitzman. Mark, thanks so much for joining. Excited to pick your brain a little bit today. I think there's a lot to dig into here.
Absolutely, looking forward to
it. So I was pretty eager to take this call with you because I think that the topic of SIM swap attacks is one I've been personally aware of for a decent amount of time, but then it feels like in the past 6 months or so, I personally know multiple people, some of whom are higher profile folks, who have run into some really significant issues with this. And I think it's one of those topics that people maybe don't educate themselves too much on until it's too late. So I've got a lot of kind of questions about getting into the nitty gritty of that, how you guys do things at Afani. But I want to maybe just start out so people kind of know you, know your background, know what you're bringing to the table here and why this is so important to you. Can you just start us off by just telling us who are you? How did you get here today to be doing what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Kentucky, and I got into the startup game in the cybersecurity business before it was called cybersecurity. I think I joined in 2001, a company called Big Fish, thinking, what did I do? Because I worked for AT&T at the time, and changed the name to FrontBridge. And I worked for a couple different founders. So FrontBridge was an email security company, and that got purchased by Microsoft. So I had the taste for startups. So I went to a cloud-based web security company called ScanSafe that was acquired by Cisco Systems. And so again, the thought of going back to a big company just wasn't something I wanted to do. So I went to another startup out of Southern California that was in mobile security, and so I've been I worked for them for a couple of years, for about 6 or 7 years, and then I was kind of in between projects, and then I ended up getting SIM swap myself. And so I was kind of playing around with my own startup in crypto. Around 2016, I started getting into Bitcoin, and then in 2017, 18, I wanted to have my own startup. But then I got SimSwap, and then that became my career. And it was a painful experience, but I searched out the only person who had claimed that they had solved it. He happened to be part of a startup that was building a big Bitcoin ATM network, so we hit it off. And he had solved it for himself. So the first thing that was done was establish the name of Afani, and it's been now almost 5 years under the Ifani brand. We're coming up on 5 years, somewhere around November this year. And so I've been in mobile. This will be probably my 10th or 11th year in mobile security in a row.
So you've got the pedigree for it, and unfortunately, the personal negative experience with it to kind of move you in this direction. And it's funny to me because we still call these phones, but it's it's our lives in our pockets, basically. And I think that's what people, we kind of intuitively know it, but we still call them phones. And that's maybe, it's a computer that holds basically all the secrets of your life, all your access to everything. And you carry it around with you everywhere you go. And then you trust some big companies that you assume are pretty secure to take care of the back end of that. And obviously problems happen. I'm wondering if you don't mind discussing a little bit of the specifics of what happened. So you were SIM swapped. You were in fact a victim of what now your company Afani is working to prevent. Can you talk about that experience a little bit for anybody who hasn't gone through that? Hopefully you never will, but you might. So can you kind of just walk through like what happened? How did you figure out it was happening? What did you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the time, I had 19 years experience of building cybersecurity companies. So I thought I had it totally covered with my carrier, and I had actually changed the rules in my profile that to make any changes on my account, I had to be there in person with both a driver's license and a passport, and the PIN and everything. So I thought it was the last thing on my mind. So I was driving to visit my parents, and I happened to be in the middle of the Arizona desert between Phoenix and Tucson. And so I was talking to my dad, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to be there in about 50 minutes." And then the call gets cut off, and so I thought, well, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, so the carrier must have just lost coverage. And then an error came up, said no network detected. And so I started to think like, oh no, did my mobile account get stolen away? And I started to kind of get panicked, and I'm looking around. I don't always see the desert, so there's no WalMarts, there's no pay phones at gas stations anymore, and so I either had to like go to the nearest Walmart that was like 30 minutes away and beg somebody to use their phone, and or just 45 minutes and go to my parents' house. So I chose to go directly to my parents' house. When I got to the garage, the Wi-Fi kicked in, and 6 password resets went up right at my phone. And that's when I knew, like, okay, I suspected that's what happened. Now I know that's what happened. My mobile account was stolen away. So, I run in the door. My dad, wanted to hug me and like, oh, because he hadn't seen me in a while. And I'm like, I'm going into your office. I got an emergency. And I called the carrier, and so they thought I was the hacker. And that's what they were saying. Like, how do we know you're not the hacker? And like, so the verification took longer. And then I'm like, I panicked and I called you on my phone. I dialed the 611 to get them. And I'm like, how am I even talking to you? Is there some feature on the phone that allows me to call you even though my and he's like, no, he's like, that's a good question. So he looks and he says, oh, what they did was they moved your account back. So they stole my mobile account for 61 minutes, and then they moved it back to my phone to hide it. And at the time, I was like, okay, great. Like, well, I have my account back. But then as like, kind of like every hour went by, I started to think like, I have to sleep at some point. Um, so for like the next 90 days, I wasn't sleeping because every time I went to bed, I was like, man, are they going to take my mobile account away and push it back? And so if I woke up at 3 in the morning, 5, 7 in the morning, every time I would look at my phone, be like, do I have LTE? And so I didn't use Wi-Fi for a couple of months because I thought that would mask the issue. I'd wake up and I'd have my Twitter updates, emails, and I'd think nothing was wrong. And so, it was through that pain that I thought somebody had to solve it. And there's reactive solutions. There's mobile apps that'll claim that they'll let you know that you've been SIM swapped, but after you've been SIM swapped, then it's kind of irrelevant. And so, made the right connection, had the right level of pain that I was willing to do this whole new startup and drop what I was doing. That's how painful it was. And so now, 4.5 years later, well, here we are, and we've grown, a big amount this year. These data breaches that keep happening, are pretty scary. So every time one of these happens, I'm just very thankful that, I'm working for Afani, but that Afani exists.
Yeah, I can imagine that 90 days was not very pleasant whatsoever. Worried and sleep deprived.
I lost data, I lost cloud information, I lost some crypto. They got into a bank app, but they chose. I had a few bank apps on my phone, but they chose the bank app to get into. I barely had any funds in it anyways, and so yeah, it's kind of scary when they can get it when they get that kind of access to think like who could that be sold to? Am I going to get attacked, a year from now, 3 years from now? It definitely plays on your mind.
No, I believe it. And I mean, it's one of those things too where it was probably almost a little bit more disconcerting that they were the ones who gave you the access back. Like they flip-flopped it back. So it's like, okay, they were only in here for 61 minutes. They clearly got something that they wanted and then got back out. If you would have just been in the middle of the desert and maybe you didn't have the service from the carrier in general, maybe you just wouldn't even have noticed if you hadn't been on the phone with your dad. So I guess that's a fortunate thing. And, I'm wondering, because I want to get into as well, like exactly how Efani works and kind of what your mission is there and how you're taking care of people. But I think first, just for anyone, they've heard this personal experience of yours, but they still may be wondering like, okay, wait, what do you mean SIM swap attacked? Like how does that actually work? So can you kind of walk through a little bit of the mechanics of the typical SIM swap? Are we talking just general social engineering? Are we talking some sort of a technical hack? Are we talking inside jobs? Like, how does this actually work for most SIM swap victims?
Yeah, so it's always good to define what a SIM swap is. So there's a legal SIM swap that sometimes people call a port. And so let's say you have an iPhone 11 today, and you go buy the iPhone 15. So when you go to the store, obviously the store, when you get the new phone and you say, okay, I want to move my phone number over to this new phone. So that's a legal SIM swap. They're changing your mobile account to point from your 11 over to your 15. And each of those phones has a SIM or an eSIM in them that your mobile account points to. So what a SIM swap attack is where a nefarious person gets your carrier to point from your iPhone 11 over to their phone. And they could be your next door neighbor, they could be 4,000 miles away, and now your phone goes dead, but your mobile service is now pointing to their phone. And now they have access to your voice, your data, your SMS. When they call somebody, it's coming up your phone number. When they text somebody, so they can impersonate you. But the main thing they're trying to do is to figure out then what applications you use, and then just say forgot password, all the way down the line. And also that includes like an authenticator app. And so if they say, hey, I forgot my password, and it says enter your 6-digit authenticator code as an example. So now they know that, okay, this person was using authenticator code. So they can try to get into your emails and daisy chain through that, and then try and reset your authenticator app. And so if they're a professional and you give them enough time, then they're going to break into everything that they possibly can. And it's not always about money. It's not always about crypto. It can be just about pictures and data and tax information. something to harass you, something to blackmail you with, dating apps, anything that they can um, to either gather your information for a later attack or to sell it, including trying to rip you off at that moment. And in terms of how they're doing it, so social engineering is the easiest one, right? Where they would call up and pretend to be me, and there's really no penalty for this, right? So if I went into a phone store and I pretended to be Mark, I'm pretending to be somebody, and they can't verify me, then there's no penalty. I just leave. I go to another store, try it over and over and over, and each time they may learn like what information do I need, and but they'll go in there with fake IDs, or they have a buddy that works at the store, like a third party store, who will like do a fake, the verification and just pretend like it's the right person and verify it. But there's also insiders, there's also bribes that you can find this online where cops have arrested a number of people that have taken bribes, and that we've seen it range from anywhere from $300 to $3,000 just to repetitively like SIM swap people. And I'm sure like these insiders where they work at a carrier, they're probably got a cut and target people and go for big amounts because people are losing, especially in the crypto space. Bart Stevens, the founder of Blockchain Ventures, he lost 6.3 million of Bitcoin on a SIM swap. And what somebody did with him was they impersonated him. They went into a store and then they bought a phone and a line off of his account. And so a lot of people don't think, they kind of forget, like they've given the carrier their social security number. So in a sense, they've signed up for credit. So somebody went in, buys a phone and a line in his account, then they go home, call the 800 number and say, and they're calling from a line on your account now. And they've got a phone with a device ID, and the NZ number is going to match the records of the carrier. So it's much easier to impersonate. So they call up the carrier and say, "Oh, I want to move my old line to my new phone." And so that's what they did to Bart Stevens. That's one of the faster growing methods. And I thought about doing a video on it, but I don't want to create like 10,000 more, SIM swappers by telling them how easy it is to do that. But the one thing that's really, there's two things that are fueling this though is one is AI tools. And so, a lot of people kind of forget that their entire life is profiled and related to their mobile number. Like I don't need to know somebody's name, their history. If you just give me their mobile number, then it's very easy to use these tools to go 3 layers deep of like every job you've had, like every address you've had, every landline, every email associated with you. And so people can now like test ahead of time. They can figure out what are all your emails associated with you, then go into Coinbase and just say forgot password and test each one. And see what they kind of they get. The other big thing that's fueling it is these data breaches. And so I don't know if you've read about this data breach that happened that they just announced last Friday. But it was a company called Snowflake, and there was 160 companies that had loaded customer data up into Snowflake. Because Snowflake's one of these big data companies that allows analysis of this data, and AT&T was one of those. So AT&T loaded up 110 million records into Snowflake, call records and SMS records as well. And Snowflake only used the login and password. They didn't use an authenticator app. They didn't use even SMS verification, no YubiKey, nothing. And so these hackers find out about their lack of security, and they start sending out malware to people's devices to gather login information. And so AT&T's 110 million customers, and it was data in 2022. So it wasn't recent data, but it was the second half of 2022. And hackers took 110 million records from that, of just AT&T, but they got Ticketmaster, all their customer data. Advanced Auto Parts had 2.3 million people, and that included Social Security, all this PII information about these people. And so, the total amount of millions, it must be like 150 million plus, I'm guessing, but AT&T took the brunt of the news. and this actually happened. They discovered it in April, but uh, our federal government said, well, for public security, we have to hold this announcement, and so they finally announced it last Friday. So I don't know how that is helpful to not let everybody know that uses these companies, because it's like a lot of big name companies. And it's crazy that they would load up all of their customers' data in a third party tool without asking them, like, how secure is this? So, that's information where these AI tools, you run it on that. And to social engineer now these carriers. So imagine the information to do like tax fraudsters where they file early, your taxes early, and have the refund sent to a certain address, or identity fraud, taking out loans in people's names. Like these companies, like it's going to be a massive lawsuit. It's going to be a mess.
It's insane to me that this snowflake didn't like that their own internal security to protect 150 million records was so lax.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
I
I've
mean,
been in
that's just
startups.
insane.
No, I've been in enough startups where I know, well, you can just know there's probably one guy that like multiple people went to and said, like, don't you think we should have security? And there's probably one guy who's like, yeah, it's not, we don't need it, or we'll do that. And it's like, it's yeah, it's very unfortunate. People just don't really know about it. I mean, it's hit the news in like, but not like it's not like on national news, and that I've seen anyway. But like security publications, it's pretty big.
I mean, and again, it's because we are in a digitally connected world. I think like we as humans maybe still haven't caught up to the fact. Perhaps some of the younger folks have, like they've just grown up as digital natives. They maybe intuitively know a little bit more. Hey, it's out there. But for folks that are on the older end or middle age end of the spectrum, like this is still all kind of a new frontier where literally there are fingerprints and footprints to everything you have done, to, like you said, to all of your past addresses, to anything you were connected to. And it's just out there. And odds are you've probably been involved in one or two or more data breaches that you're not even aware of. Like unless you're, and even if you are monitoring these things, you're checking to see, okay, is my information appearing on various dark websites? Even then, there's not so much recourse for you. It's like it's out there. The genie doesn't go back in the bottle. You're kind of screwed. And so, I think the more information that's out there about people, it's like, well, that becomes a lot easier to construct target maps of, okay, what kind of, if we're talking about a sophisticated group of people who are doing this as a business, an illegitimate business, but a business operation where they're saying, okay, let's find the best possible targets to then take and go SIM swap these people and strip their lives from their mobile devices. Like it's kind of a terrifying thing. And I feel like most folks would rather just not think about it. Like, oh, okay, it's not going to happen to me. But this isn't just big name celebrities that we're talking about. This isn't just, Bitcoin millionaires that we're talking about. Like this happens to normal people. I don't know if there's just any kind of stories that you have to bring that home a little bit so people understand, like, just because you're not a big name or some public figure, like you're not immune to this. In fact, they may look for that because it's some lower hanging fruit. You probably have lower security. Maybe you're not as attuned to these threats that are coming your way.
Yeah, so it certainly, if you go back like 4 or 5 years, it was mainly like VIP, sort of really like celebrities, and then it became the targets became influencers, like trying to take their YouTube account away that people spent 8 years building up and then ransom it back. Um, when crypto came along, then that took uh, that was basically like 99% of the target for a while. And so definitely, if you're into crypto in any way, then you are a target. And it doesn't, like, if you own your own jet, or you only have like $2,000 with crypto, the SIM swappers don't care. If they can spend 20 minutes and take $3,000 from you, that's a pretty good payoff. But at this point, with all these data breaches, that it's made it so easy that everybody's become a target at this point. we've all been, in data breaches. I mean, we're actually releasing a tool we're hoping to do it by the end of July, but we call it phone number scan, where you put in your mobile number and it's going to show you how easy it is just to get some basic information on you. And we actually released this about 18 months ago as kind of like a pilot. And at that point, it searched these databases for like, is your information part of any data breach? And so, I did it on my number, and I was part of one of the biggest data breaches there is. And so I would be surprised at this point if somebody could be alive today and have a mobile phone for 4 or 5 years and not have been part of some kind of breach, whether it's like a travel bureau or the government or, a hospital system at this point. And so it's just, it's kind of a matter of just kind of when you're going to be the target. And there's only so many, hackers out there. I guess that's the good thing, is that so much data has been released and it's made so many targets that may be the only defense that somebody has, is that so many people now could be targets and there's only so many hackers. But the more that these hackers have tools to break in, certainly AI. I mean, I had a long conversation with this guy from AI, and it just ended up, scaring me more about what, where he said AI was going, and his prediction is that it won't be very long where like a hacker could actually ask AI, how would I hack Mark? How would I hack this person, that person? And that it would look at their profile, what applications they use, what mobile service they use, and look at all these elements and actually come up with a plan of like, here's the weakest point, and here's where they may be the most vulnerable, and here's where you maybe could get, the most money. And it's really just a matter of time, like all our information gets uploaded into, these AI tools. And I don't know how you prevent it. I think that's kind of what Elon Musk is warning about, is like, right now, like if our information gets loaded into like one of these data brokers, like your criminal record, you can pay services to go and have it removed, right? And then 30 days later it'll be loaded back in because they have web crawlers. But so you can pay people that are continually, that they're going to look for that and delete it. But once information gets loaded into AI, who are you going to go to at that point and say, hey, you got to remove that? And right now I'm not aware of that, existing. And so I'm sure somebody's going to turn AI into this kind of nefarious tool. But right now that the AI is not really needed. I mean, it's just going to make it easier. There's just too much information on all of us out there for these bad people. It's so easy for them. It's like, why not do it? Like the risk of them getting caught. Like I say, like you could call on me, somebody could call and say they're me to every carrier and try it 20 times, and there's no penalty.
Well, and I mean, that's the thing, is that, we're using terms like hacker and things like that. And for when we're talking about these large data breaches, like, yes, that's people who have some usually significant proficiency are executing those breaches, are putting that, sending out that malware and are extracting data afterwards. But it seems like when it comes to SIM swap attacks, it's really actually not, like, it is more of a social engineering game. So if anyone without any, you don't have to be a genius computer programmer to go and buy some information off of the dark web to then put together a list of people you want to try to hit and to make a bunch of phone calls. Like that's a pretty low skill, maybe high effort for now, but pretty low skill endeavor. So I think that's kind of the scary part to me, is like, these aren't necessarily geniuses executing this. They've just figured out, how is this system working? What do I need to say? What are the right things I need to tell the customer service agent who you're working with? Or even better, you've got a man on the inside. Perfect. That's going to save you a few steps. Yeah. But it's worrisome. And I think that it's something that people do need to be thinking about. And especially, as Bitcoin's price continues to rise, which we all know that it will over a long enough time horizon, it's like what you may think of as, yourself as an insignificant little fish swimming amongst these whales. Well, you start to become an even more attractive target to people. And again, that's a little disconcerting. A little bit of Bitcoin now is going to be worth a lot of fiat a few years down the road. So it's like, these are things you want to be thinking about now, kind of putting best practices in place. And with that, I'd love if you could just talk a little bit about, okay, because we've now terrified everybody a little bit with the problem. Hopefully not too much, but can you talk a little bit about how does Afani work? What exactly makes this different than a traditional plan that you have directly with a carrier? Why is this something that people should be looking at, and what sort of assurances do they have that the same sort of thing isn't just going to happen with Ifani that does with AT&T or T-Mobile, Verizon, whatever carrier they may have?
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to address a really good point you made, because I've often said like hackers is actually complimenting these people too much. It's making it seem like they're smart because there's a 15-year-old kid that stole around 26 million, and there's been a bunch of teenagers that have been busted. They made mistakes. They went out and spent too much money and then ended up getting caught because they just aren't very smart. But that was a very, very good point. It's not about coding. It's about uh, really social engineering. And if anything, 15 or 16-year-old kid may be better at AI tools than a 50-year-old. But in terms of what Afani does, it's very simple. So we're set up as a reseller of AT&T and Verizon, and I'll use the AT&T option just as the example. So obviously you can go out and buy directly from AT&T. And that means AT&T has all your information, your address, your payment information, your social security number, all the things that they would collect today and all the carriers do. But you could also buy AT&T through Afani. And what that means is that Afani owns that account. They're not an AT&T customer, they're our customer. And so one of the differences is that um, when you port your number over to Afani, we lock it down, and then everything we do after that is manual. And the reason that's important is because this industry is fairly loose in the sense that like we have portals that give us access into every mobile operator in the US. So if somebody calls us and they're like on Mint Mobile or Google Fi or T-Mobile, Verizon, they say like, okay, I want to move my account to Afani. We don't need to talk to their carrier, and neither do they. They give us a couple bits of information and we can pull them over. And so that's the reason why when we port somebody over, we're separating basically the world from being able to do that. But all the carriers have done this because they have so many people that leave and come, to their service every single day that they want to make it super cheap if you want to leave. Like they don't want to have to talk to you, just like, okay, leave. And so the other thing that we do that's different is that so we don't give the carrier information. So the carrier doesn't have your name. We don't even take your social security, but they don't have your name, your address, your payment information like they normally would. And so our customers are hidden behind Afani, and then Afani we also use a front to ourselves too. So to the carrier like AT&T, it just looks like you're an anonymous executive that works for a company and that they don't know who they are. And so we're trying to make it as not as anonymous as possible. So we're also locking out all of AT&T and Verizon, all their employees, their stores, their third-party stores, independent retailers and independent stores, because those stores don't vet people, as much as like an actual owned store. And what we're doing is we're eliminating all of the middlemen who can be tricked, bribed, part of the deal. They can be the hacker themselves, or like every time you call the 800 number, they can be collecting your verification information, and then get a list of that, and then sell it to SIM swap hackers or put it on the dark web and sell it. And so we're eliminating all of those people in the middle that have some control and influence over being able to port somebody's number out. And we provide the 24/7 support, and that's by phone, chat, messaging, and we also provide people a support email when they become a customer. And then we have just more stringent verification process. So we're doing things that they would not be able to afford to do. Like the carriers would become nonprofit if they were trying to do what we did. Um, and so we're providing the network. So we're providing the voice data, SMS, and we can provide it globally for anyone that travels globally. Wi-Fi calling, hotspot, and all of that. But you get the privacy of from the carrier and all their marketing, and they sell data and third parties. And then you also get our SIM swap security. But we also provide a $5 million insurance policy. And so the easiest way to sum up our business is we sell mobile security, and our job is to protect that insurance policy from ever being used. Because that's our business, that's our reputation, that's our business. Whereas what the carriers have done is they've slipped in arbitration clauses. And so if you get SIM swap, like let's say Bart Stevens wanted to sue his carrier, he's most likely going to find that there's arbitration clauses. He's going to have to get an arbitration attorney, sue him. And so I talked to a number of attorneys because I've been asked to be an expert witness a number of times. And I've never accepted it, but I have attorneys that contact me to represent their victim. But because I don't have time for it, and I'm not trying to make money by the hour, but what the attorneys are telling me that they're settling for around 35 to 40%, and then they take their fee out of that. So if you lose 100 grand, you're probably going to be lucky to get 40, and you're going to have to pay your attorney, a percentage of that as well. And then you get, probably an apology letter from the carrier, and that's about it. And it was interesting the last time I got asked to go, the attorney had 8 cases, and the same judge on all the cases. And so he said that the attorney had no idea what a SIM swap was, wasn't technical, and the carrier's defense was that every carrier gets SIM swap, and therefore it's been normalized. And because it's normalized, we should not be held accountable for something that is just normal in the industry. Like tires go flat, and things happen. And I thought, look, that's kind of an interesting defense. I've never really knew that could even be used. That normalizing something could actually be used as part of the defense. And he said, "You guys had never been SIM swapped, right?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's why I want you guys. That's why I want you as an expert witness." And I also know one of the main guys that gets called in to report to the carriers. He's also one of our biggest fans too. And so it's interesting to see what's going on. There's law firms out there that are now specializing in SIM swap law.
Wow.
And these and especially like data breaches that result in SIM swap. So it's bad enough where attorneys are, and of course I get a lot of attorneys to call me up saying like, "Hey, I'd love to be your partner when you get to talk to a victim. Like send me a victim, and I'll help them recover their money." And so I get to see both sides of the victimhood, which happens even by the attorneys too.
It's interesting to hear that they would use that as a defense. That, well, I mean, it's like a company that sells poisoned food being like, well, all the companies sell poisoned food. So, but I guess then again, if you've got, I mean, we're talking about carriers make a massive amount of money. They're incredibly interconnected into everything that we do. They're obviously working hand in hand with the federal government, and they also obviously have incredibly powerful lobbyists that work for them. So,
and they're the second largest, advertiser behind big pharma on national news, and that's one of the reasons. That's my theory as to why you never see this on national news. But if you search on YouTube for local news SIM swap, you'll see the Dallas channel, Los Angeles, cities, all local news all over warn like they're elderly people, crypto, and that kind of news is all over the place. But on national news, the only person who's ever really talked that I've seen that made a negative statement about the carriers was Lou Dobbs on Fox Business News, where he did a news clip on how the federal government bought everybody's location data without a warrant. And then 3 days later, he was let go by Fox News. Now, probably not related, but you probably don't want to say anything negative about the pharma industry or the telecom industry, because they're paying like 97% of your advertising for the stations. So that's kind of the environment that we're in.
Yeah,
they're great companies. It's kind of amazing tech, right?
Right.
You have this cellular device anywhere you're in the world. So I don't want to like, I mean, they're not bad. They're not bad people. I got a lot of great people that work at them, but they're huge and there's too many vendors. Like I was going to do a video on all the different vendors that make up, just to make a text call, make a phone call. Um, and I sort of map all this out of like all the different areas that companies that could, if they got hacked, you'd lose this. And the video would have been over 3 hours. And I thought nobody's going to watch. It's too much. And people think AT&T owns their own cell towers and Verizon, they don't. Like there's 108 different cell tower providers, and these cellular companies, lease space off these towers, and text messages are outsourced to different companies that handle fax, and so we're relying on so many companies to do one transaction on the internet, and all it takes is one rogue person at one of those companies, and that's why we used to not sell on privacy. We used to really just sell on SIM swapping, and the fact the carrier didn't have your information was really more of a quiet thing where it makes it harder for somebody to ever SIM swap because they can't walk into a store and pretend they're me because the store can't access my account. But after T-Mobile got breached multiple times, and Verizon's been breached, now AT&T's had two breaches in the last. They've announced two breaches in the last 90 days. So they announced just 2 months ago, I think it was in May, that they lost 74 million records, and now 110. So some people's information's out there twice, and so now all of a sudden the privacy and the fact the carrier doesn't have information, you can't steal what doesn't exist, is now like one of the reasons people are switching to Afani.
The absolute best and only way to make sure your Bitcoin are truly safe from hackers, SIM swappers, and 15-year-old kids with way too much time on their hands is to head to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off the fully open source, Bitcoin only BitBox02 hardware wallet. Then get your Bitcoin off the exchange and into your own self-custody. Again, if your Bitcoin is in cold storage, even SIM swappers can't touch it. The BitBox02 is easy as hell to use, whether you're brand new to Bitcoin and it's your very first hardware wallet, or you're a seasoned psychopath and you've got more wallets than you'd like to admit. It is Bitcoin only, and yet again, it is fully open source. You can head to their GitHub and verify that for yourself. There's no need to trust me or Bitbox. When you go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker, not only do you get 5% off, but you also help support this fucking podcast. So thank you. Now, a lot of you listening to this show may already be deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, but if you're listening to this podcast and feeling a bit overwhelmed by all of this, don't sweat it. BitcoinConsulting.us has you covered. Some people go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole completely solo, but others want someone to guide them on their journey. If you are one of the latter, go to bitcoinconsulting.us. Whether you're an individual and you want someone to help you with your personal Bitcoin strategy, getting everything set up and figured out, or you're a company and you want help integrating Bitcoin payments, implementing private projects, or just need some general contractor services, Bitcoin Consulting can take care of you. So go to bitcoinconsulting.us and book a consultation today. Again, that's bitcoinconsulting.us. Well, I think, for especially just knowing the folks I know across the Bitcoin space, there's obviously a lot of desire to remain pseudonymous or anonymous, or to at least, it's a spectrum, right? Because if you're interacting with any sort of digital services, like as we said, at some point along the way, you've been fingerprinted, you've left a footprint somewhere. Even, perhaps the best example of somebody being really, really good at this was Satoshi Nakamoto, right? Who managed to somehow still but that is the exception, obviously not the rule. And I mean, this seems like something that if you're wanting to at least maintain some shred of privacy in one of the most important areas in your life, which is, again, your mobile life, your mobile digital life, this is something you need to seriously look at, because if not, it just seems like a massive security hole with so many different points of failure. Like there's just so many places along that spectrum. And until kind of looking into this a little bit prior to the interview, I wasn't even just aware of like the uh, how easy it is for numbers to be ported over. Like you get a couple of malicious actors who have been bribed at some local reseller, and that's all you need. I mean, they, like you said, you guys have the ability to go in there as long as you've got the permission and to pull this stuff out. And luckily, you guys are good actors in this space, but obviously there's a lot of bad ones too. And so if your complete like digital life is reliant on, boy, I hope one of these hundreds of thousands of people across this potential chain of attack vectors doesn't screw me over. It's like, that's kind of, boy, you got to be pretty lucky not to get screwed over at some point, it seems. So it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and then people, do simple. People don't really think about it, but they make simple mistakes. Like one of the things I tell people, just don't do this. Which is like they'll set up their phone with an email account, like an iCloud or like a Gmail on an Android account, and they use an email, which is the email they set up their Coinbase account, their Exodus account. They send emails to friends. They sign up on websites. They they use that for their bank account and so people really need to spread that out. So I always tell people like set up your phone with an iCloud account, but only use it for that. Don't use it for anything else. Or a Gmail account on an Android device and only use it for that. You can use other emails on it, but in terms of the account, just don't use that account. And because if you think about when you email somebody, you're sending them your login information. And so a lot of people don't really think about the fact that they're using emails and it's become and it's the login information from for so many of their accounts, and they also people tend to use the same pin codes for different accounts, and there's companies out there right now. So one of the things that's happening is that the hackers are trying to they'll call you up and say like they're Amex or they're your cable company. But they've actually gone a step further than that. What they've started to do is actually pay for advertising. So let's say you have a problem with Cox Cable and you want to call them, so you search Cox Cable support, and their a number comes up. So you call it thinking you're calling Cox Cable, and of course when they answer, they got a warehouse somewhere, cheap labor, and it's Cox Cable. How can I help you? And I'm not picking on Cox. I'm not saying this happened to Cox, but and so it's like, okay, what's your username? Okay, that matches our records. What's your PIN code? Oh, that matches our records. What's your mobile number? Like, and then they gather the information. So okay, you're verified. And now, meanwhile, they're shipping that up to somebody else who's then going to try and hack, with that information. And so they're actually trying to get people to just proactively call them. And these are the kind of things that are happening. And you can imagine like if you're 70 years old, you don't really think about these things. You just, assuming that, well, the internet told me that this was the number for, uh, Warner Cable or whatever it is, and then people call it and volunteer their information out.
I mean, and that's the thing. Like, this is a problem even for quote tech savvy people. This is a huge problem for folks who are not at all tech savvy, who don't really barely understand how to use their phone, and don't understand how much things have progressed, how much they are potentially at risk. And like that kind of just like makes me sick to my stomach to think about all the people that are just incredibly vulnerable out there, who are, probably a lot of them on the older end of the spectrum. And we're talking about, having your identity stolen, having your life completely turned upside down just because, you weren't aware that this was even a threat vector for you. And
Yeah. It's people in Bitcoin are some of the most technical people,
yeah,
on average. I would say they're much easier to talk to because they tend to be on the more technical side, and yet, um, they're probably most of the victims at this point right now. And so even if you are technical, it's like the best storage is cold storage, and because you can't hack that, but if you got crypto on an exchange or on a online wallet, then yeah, it's vulnerable.
Yeah, and that is a great reminder for folks. It's like if you have, to get your Bitcoin off the exchanges, take it into your own self custody in cold storage. Uh, use a Bitbox O2 Bitcoin only hardware wallet if you want to support the sponsors of this show. Just throw that little plug in there. But really, like that's the only way. So you get SIM swapped. If your Bitcoin's sitting in cold storage, okay, fine. The rest of your life may still get turned upside down, but at least you've got, and you're going to be dealing with that for a while. But at least you've got that. So I mean, at least that is the nice thing about Bitcoin. There are ways that you can take that offline, so that hardware signing device is the only way that you have to move that around, and at least you're protected there. But if you've got Bitcoin that's on an exchange, like, and especially if people are targeting you for this, that's the first thing that they're going to do. And to strip that off, oh, you need to authenticate before you can transfer the funds out because we don't recognize this device or whatever. And then they've got all the means to authenticate that they are in fact you. And then you're screwed, because once that's sent out, it's like, it's kind of the whole point. It's not going back.
Crypto every day, as it rises, you have to sit there and you do the math in your head. And you're like, when I got ripped off, it wasn't that big of a deal. But you know what? It sure would be nice to have that, 6 figures now. It's like, so that's the painful part for people that have been victims is, at one point, and Bitcoin was, even when it was just, $3,000, if somebody owned, 10 Bitcoin and it's gone, they have to do that math today. Be like, okay, yeah, it would have been 600 grand. And that's the hard part about being a victim.
Yeah. And, I do want to ask you, because, you walked through a bit just how you at Afani separate your customers from the rest of the vulnerabilities, right? But obviously then, okay, you've removed a bunch of points of failure, but one could make the argument that now perhaps aren't you creating a single point of failure? What happens if somebody, because obviously there are still just humans that work at Afani, good humans, I would imagine, but you never know with people. So, without, I guess, giving away the goods entirely, because I'm sure some of this stuff you guys keep under wraps, but can you tell us just at a higher level or surface level, kind of what's the methodology for you guys to making sure that, okay, we're now entrusted with these people's information. How do we make sure we don't fall victim to the same social engineering, the same bribery, the same points of failure that exist in that wider industry?
Yeah, great question. And so some people will say like, oh, you guys have great technology, and and I kind of explain it the opposite way, which is what we've done is we've stripped out the tech. Like there's no free Hulu, there's no free Disney, there's no free Netflix. That's data stealing, or allows third parties to profile you and get information from you. So we don't sell data as well. So and then also we don't collect data. So we're not collecting call records. We're not collecting SMS records. And the only thing that we do collect is payment information. And then separately is we collect the verification information. And then also internally, even for our own employees. So even in my position, if let's say you were a customer and 3 months from now you called me up and said, "Hey Mark, can you tell me how much data I've used this month?" I can't access that. And so it's a need to know basis. And so even our customer support, tier 1, tier 2, so it's tier 1, tier 3, our tier 1 support doesn't have access into a customer database. And so they can only do a certain level of verification and limited to granting you things and not being able to do any kind of risky transaction. And the riskiest transaction is the port out. And so that's in a sense where like all our focus is when somebody says like, I got a new phone or I want to port out. That's where we're laser focused on that and making sure that that can't be done without multiple humans involved. And so for the risky transactions, it takes 2 different humans, and I don't want to say who they are, but it's limited to that. So I couldn't even. You could beg me, you could bribe me, you could pay me $1 million to try and port your number out, and I have zero access to look at your account. And And our tier ones also don't have any access to look at people's account either. But the fact that we don't collect data and that we're separating out information from people into two different encrypted, siloed databases as well. So you can never say never. Like, is it possible that somebody just flips out for some reason? But the way that we built it and designed it, like it would be even difficult, even if like a few handful of people, if one of them decided that they were going to try and do something. The way we got it designed, I can't see it happening.
Okay. I appreciate the acknowledgement that it's like never say never, because obviously, nothing is going to be, it's an inherently, I guess, vulnerable system, and you guys have done what you can to make it less vulnerable than certainly the run-of-the-mill carrier does, which is great. I am curious about one thing you said, because you said you guys aren't, you're not like storing extra data. You're not storing, I think you mentioned even like message traffic and things like that. Does that mean, because, okay, if I'm thinking of like 3-letter agencies, the various intelligence agencies, we all know, perhaps not the details, but we know that to an extent they have various backdoors, either at hardware OS level, or certainly more like walking in the front door with most carriers. So how does that work with you guys? I mean, is it like if they come to you with a FISA warrant, a warrant that basically you are required legally to comply, then you have to, but otherwise do they have less visibility actually into at least the personal details of your users than somebody, if I'm just using a traditional carrier?
Yeah, it's a great question. I get asked that all the time by certain people. So there's this law called the CALEA law, and it requires all the telecom operators to collect information. So all the carriers are collecting call records and SMS records, not the content of it. At least they're not legally allowed to collect it, but they're required to collect call records. So, but we're not. So, in the example like that you're talking about, like if somebody came to us with a FISA warrant and said, like, okay, tell me everything on this mobile number, and it happens to be mine, and they've got a warrant for it, it'd be like, okay, great. Well, here's my payment information. Here's my verification information, and there would be no other information. But in theory, they would just go to the carrier, and the carrier would deliver them information. It just wouldn't have your name attached to it, your information attached to it. But then they could, in theory, just say like, okay, well, this is what it is. And so, best case, there'd be plausible deniability. But yeah, Afani's not meant to try and get around, the law or skirt like the intelligence agencies. It's like the most regulated industry, at least one of them, and so it would make it more difficult for them. They would have to take extra steps to get information, but we would have to comply. We haven't had it yet. We haven't had anybody come.
Yeah. Not trying to put you in a weird position in there. Just was honestly curious because of the structure.
I get asked that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and for any 3-letter agencies listening, I am in no way trying to skirt any of your surveillance. I'm a very compliant person and do everything exactly as I'm told.
I'd be more worried if I said like, oh yeah, we wouldn't comply.
Right.
Because there's companies out there where they're like anonymous, and like you can buy like data SIMs, for example, like to travel all over the world, like via crypto, and they don't take any of your information, or you can buy a phone line from them. Problem is that if you use that phone line for verification of like your crypto or anything proprietary, and they're not following, or they're going to ignore federal laws, like then they could actually be shut down, like out of the blue. And so you wouldn't want to be in that situation either, where all of a sudden like your mobile account doesn't work because they weren't following the laws, and is then who you call.
Right. Quite literally, who do you call?
So
yeah,
because a lot of these crypto companies, especially, like they don't have customer support. And that's one of these, like when I talk to victims, and they tell me, how they got ripped off, and it's like, oh, well, I got this message, and it was from Coinbase. So I called Coinbase, and they answered the phone. I know immediately. It's like you weren't talking to Coinbase.
No. Good luck getting somebody on the phone there. Like that should be your first red flag. It's like saying, yeah, you got somebody on the phone at Google. Like it's not happening.
Yeah, I talked to one person. This is just a couple months back. What they did was they initiated a wire transfer into the bank account of like 100 grand, and then they notify him and pretended to be Coinbase, and they said, hey, it looks like $100,000 of crypto is being removed from your Coinbase account and sent to your bank account. So please check on that. So the guy calls, he calls his bank account, and it shows a pending inbound wire transfer. And I'm sure they then canceled the inbound wire transfer. So he calls them back and they answer, and that's when I knew, like, okay, you're in trouble. And he's like, what can I do? They're like, oh, we've got this other Coinbase wallet, so set it up on this Coinbase wallet, then transfer your crypto over there. It'll be protected. And so he sends me the URL, and it's set up. It just looks like it's Coinbase. So of course, it's like Coinbase, something dot com. And so the guy voluntarily transferred $100,000 worth of crypto into the wallet that was probably out of South Africa or somewhere that wasn't KYC'd, and they got him to voluntarily do it. It doesn't have to be really even a hack. They could social engineer you as the end user and trick you out of your account. So yeah, people need to be aware of all these different tricks. But
it's painful to hear these kind of stories. I'm sure you hear them literally all the time, but it's like every time you hear it, there's just that, like, there's a certain point in the story where you just go, oh, I know which way it's going.
I was talking to another cybersecurity company earlier today, and they were talking about how these people call in and they're live. They're nothing to do with money. It's just they're getting digitally hacked, and I told them, like, yeah, I have like probably one person cry on the phone to me each month. It has nothing to do with crypto or money. It's literally somebody's like hacking into their phone, their mobile account, their Wi-Fi, and it can be just really, I don't know, if people are bored or there's a lot of tools out there to easily hack into, like, your Wi-Fi account, and it just, people are making software, they're making hardware tools, and it's like, if you live in an apartment, that's why my first question is when somebody says, like, oh, I'm getting hacked like 7 different ways, like, oh, do you live in an apartment building or a condo building? Because it could be somebody that is above you, below you, next to you, that are using these tools to be able to hack into your Wi-Fi or your mobile.
Yeah. No, I'm curious, and maybe I want to be conscious of your time here, but one thing that I think would be helpful for folks is, I appreciate the breakdown on SIM swaps, and I hope people really do pay attention to this and to check out Afani as well. Happy to be partnered with you guys, because again, I think this is something that's really necessary for people to at least be aware of. But outside of kind of, okay, so let's say somebody does make the switch over to Afani, outside of just SIM swap protection, I mean, you've got a lot of experience in this field in general. You've seen a lot of these scams go down or these hacks go down. Do you have just some more, like, kind of general advice for people in terms of, similar to what you mentioned earlier about, don't use your go-to daily driver email for your iCloud or for, your Google account? Like, are there any other tips like that you can share, just that you think are kind of like bedrock best security practices to at least try and reduce that potential attack surface?
Yeah, so I use several emails, for example. And so, like, one for bank, one for proprietary stuff, and then I use one throwaway that if I'm going to register on a website, I don't do anything other than register. So you separate that out. I use the VPN 100% of the time, and a lot of YouTubers will say that, oh, you don't need a VPN anymore, or that all this traffic's encrypted. But Problem is that like your DNS queries aren't encrypted. So like when you want to go to like bankofamerica.com, what's happening is your phone or your browser is sending a request to the DNS server to say like I want to go to bankofamerica.com, and that DNS cloud server then sends back an IP address, and that's how your browser knows where to go. And that's what exploded the internet because you don't have to remember like 197.42. It's like okay, it's just Bank of America, but what they can do is hijack that and and return an IP address that takes you to Bank of America n.com. And then you put your login information. And you're like, how come it's not logging in? And then they're over like logging in your bank. And so when you have a good VPN, they'll have its own private DNS, and the encryption is protecting those DNS queries. And then of course, just like be wary of like what you're clicking on, because there's websites that are hosted outside the U.S., for example, where let's say I look up your address and I see a restaurant 3 miles from you, and I give the website link to that. I take that website URL and I put it in one of these databases and say, give me a tracking link. And it gives me a link. So now I send that to you and say, hey, you should check out this restaurant. So you click on it and it goes to the restaurant. And you're like, oh, thanks for the advice. I'll check it out. Not realizing that that link now just set you up for tracking. And from now on, wherever you drive, I can watch you on my phone. And they can hide these tracking pixels in an image too. So if somebody sends you like some random image, you don't know who they are. Don't even open up the image because it can have a tracking pixel in there. These SMS messages you get, they're like UPS package waiting for you. Click here or we're going to send it back. Those can execute code to do things like grab off your phone, what's your device ID, IMSI number, what carrier do you use, and what phone model. And so now when somebody calls in your name and says, my name is Mark and I lost an iPhone 12 Pro, and this is the device ID and the IMSI number, and I'm calling the right carrier, they're going to already be convinced it's me. And then they'll say like, oh, what's your PIN? Like, oh, my phone got stolen. It's on the phone. So like, oh, no problem, Mark. We'll verify you another way. Well, I would have already done the research and had your address, mother's maiden name, and all of that. And so a lot of it comes down to like just being really careful about what you click on and what you don't, and who you give your information out to. And so I'm a victim. So I live on the paranoid side, and I wouldn't expect very many people to follow what I do. So I've actually got multiple phones, and I use one for social media that I don't even have connected to a cellular network. I have one for Afani that it's in its own little bubble, its own VPN. I don't share it with anything else. At Afani, we have our own security protocols for all the devices. And then I have one that I use for banking and crypto, and I separate it out. But I don't think people have to go that far. They just really have to, invest in AV and VPN, separate things out as much as they can, just so if you do get hacked, you're only going to get a part of it.
Yeah, I think I appreciate all the advice there, because again, I think sometimes you throw some of these horror stories at people, and then it's like you go into a little bit of a panic, like, oh, shit, I'm probably vulnerable. What do I do? And so I think there's some really good tips in there. And I'd done some reading about the embedded tracking pixels within photos too. And that when I read that, I was just like, it was a decent amount of time ago. I think now that, in the tech world, that kind of became public. When I read that, it was just made me second guess absolutely anything I was getting that had any sort of image. Cause it's like, well, that's not even going to come close to getting opened. Like that's going.
I did a video on our Afani YouTube channel talking about the dangers of people sending you these links and pixel tracking and how to prevent it. And actually Google gave me a strike for it, took that video down. And it's like
really
all these videos about how to do it, how to track somebody. And I couldn't understand that. And so I did a video on like, hey, be aware of this. And these are the kind of tools being used to track you, and here's how to prevent it. and I got a strike on it, and they took it down.
Seriously.
And, so yeah, I know I appealed, and they rejected it, and I thought that's kind of odd. Like, I mean, there's so many videos about how to hack somebody, how to track them, how to find their location, how to, you know, do this or that. But yeah, they chose me to take that video down.
I mean, that is very strange to me. And I mean, perhaps it was more so they were worried that if people got too much information about how to not be digitally tracked, that a lot of their advertising might be a little bit moot.
Yeah, I don't
I
know.
don't,
I don't know.
that's weird.
I mean, Google's tracking everybody. I mean, if
Right.
you Google a restaurant, and you see the little bar chart there that shows like you don't have to guess anymore. Like, what's the best night to go to a bar, right? You can Google the bar, and a lot of times you'll see um, you can search on by day, when's the busiest hour, like 10 p.m., 11 p.m.,
Yeah.
11 p.m., 12. And what they're doing is they garden wall off that digitally, and they're collecting data from people's phones. And that's how they get that data to show. Like, that's how they know how many people were at this restaurant last Thursday, because they're tracking that information. And
Yeah.
and so it's kind of crazy to think. I mean, it's helpful. I mean, I don't really go out to bars anymore, but 10 years ago, that would have been a really helpful tool for me to know, like, when to what time the
Right.
appropriate time was to go somewhere.
One other related question for you, just because that's kind of made me think of this, because there are so many ways that people can snoop information when you are physically close to them. Like you can download any number of programs and be able to go and extract MAC addresses from anybody nearby you, like pretty easily. Do you have any tips for in-person security? We've got the Bitcoin conference coming up in Nashville. It's about as big of a honeypot as you could have. Any tips for folks just to be on the lookout for, or to extra precautions they can take?
Yeah, I guess. So that's a really good question. We could probably have like an hour-long call just.
Yeah.
But to give you an example, like if I was a nefarious person, and I wanted to go to a Bitcoin conference, like the one in Miami, I would probably, the easiest way to gather information from somebody would be to take a cell tower soup, like an IMSI catcher, with and just carry it in a backpack, because they're about the size of a iPad mini with a couple antennas on it, and then you just walk around the conference with that, and it can collect IMSI numbers of all the different phones. And what that IMSI number will tell you is what country their mobile service is from, what carrier they're using in that country. So you'd be able to see if somebody's was had a mobile phone they were from Australia, they're using Telstra, and then there's the rest of it identifies them specifically. And so imagine you walk around and you get a list of 1,000 of those people, and then they got a buddy at a carrier. So if I had a buddy at different carriers, like let's say I wanted to pick on everybody at T-Mobile, and I had a buddy that worked there, then I could. So I wouldn't need to know your mobile number. I wouldn't need to know anything about you. If I just got that IMSI number information, and I could go back for reverse engineer that. And so I would know, okay, all these people are crypto people, or they're Bitcoin people. And so that would be one way to try and gather information on people. So, just be aware that they could backtrack it. Now, if you're using Afani, then they wouldn't be able to backtrack the EMZ number to any of your information, because it wouldn't be there.
Does even a VPN not protect that number? Because you're bouncing, because it's a cell tower spoofer?
It would not protect that phone number. So there's certain things about the protocols used by your phone and the cell tower the cell towers, which are not encrypted. And so, if somebody who's really sophisticated, like they would go in, like the big conference, like the ballroom at the Bitcoin conference, when there's like 3,000 people sitting in there, and you'd flip on a cell jammer, which puts all the phones to sleep. So all the cell phones to save battery have this feature where when there's no activity, it'll just kind of put it to sleep. But if you jam it, it's gonna cause this kind of effect. Then you turn up your nefarious network and unjam it, and then every cell phone wakes up and then says, "Hello, I'm here. are there any cell towers? And it's trying to find cell towers, and then it picks the strongest signal, which happens to be you sitting in the middle of them with an IMSI catcher. And the only way that it can make that connection is to say, like, here's information about me, my IMSI number, and that's how it knows to connect to like AT&T or T-Mobile or Verizon. And so these are kind of the nefarious ways. And these what IMSI catchers are, they're do-it-yourself homemade stingrays. So, the U.S. intelligence uses stingrays, and every government around the world uses stingrays. And so a lot of airports might have them. Like if you go to like UAE, for example, I'm sure I've talked to intelligence who have told me that for a lot of these countries, as soon as you land, you're being monitored like that. But these IMSI catchers, somebody put directions online. It's kind of like this is an educational video, and here's how to build a crock pot bomb, but it's illegal to do it, so don't do it. So they've done that with IMSI catchers, and so now you can it tells you where to order the parts and software. And so I had an MSP that managed service provider that we partner with that said they had a couple of them, and they built their own. The last one they built cost them $350. And so I said, okay, that would make a great story. Can you give me an example? And he's like, oh yeah, last week we got hired by a hotel out of Atlanta, one of the big chains, and they wanted to see how vulnerable their networks were. So they went into the lobby and they did a denial of service. What they did is they used the IMSI catcher in Wi-Fi for this instance. Because if you do it for cellular, you get caught, you can go to jail. But so they did it for Wi-Fi. They did a DDoS attack on their guest Wi-Fi network, but they had already set up a duplicate name, so it was like hotel guest Wi-Fi. So they set up a Wi-Fi network, the exact same name. So they took down the guest Wi-Fi network of the hotel, and then everybody's device that was set on auto connect reconnected to their nefarious Wi-Fi network, which was not connected to the internet. And so they immediately shut it off, and then let the guest network come back up. So they showed literally in 90 seconds how they could take over the entire guest network. And most people, that's another thing people should do is go look at your phone, see how your phone's Wi-Fi setting is it set to auto join. And you should really only auto join like your own home network. But if it's like auto join, like let's say you went into a coffee shop and you logged in and you have auto join, next time you go into that coffee shop, it's gonna automatically join. So you can set up Wi-Fi routers as IMSI catchers. And so you can flash them with software, but then just don't put a password on it. So anybody that walks by it, their cell phone will auto join it, and all it takes is a second or two, and they can gather a couple bits of information about you and then try to use that to attack you later on.
Yeah, it's another good piece.
Your AirPods you can be tracked by your AirPods.
Right.
There's a lot of different things you can be tracked by.
And short of bringing a mobile small EMP with you and detonating it in every room you walk into, it may be difficult to avoid some of that. But
I mean, it's so make a living at this point. Like you can't make a W-2 income without having a I mean, certainly if you're already super rich, you can go off grid. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to make any money anymore without having a regular cell phone.
So you may as well protect yourself at least as much as you can. Well, Mark, I really appreciate your time here. This was quite enlightening, and for anybody who is interested in listening to this, you can go to Afani.com/Walker, because I've just partnered with these guys because I like what they're doing, and as terrifying as a lot of this stuff is, it's good to know that there are companies out there who are offering some protection. But I really appreciate your time here. Any last tips, tricks, words of advice besides maybe just be vigilant out there?
Yeah, well, I would like to say that, yeah, please do use that URL that you talked about, the Ifani.com/Walker. So what we've done is we actually added a promo code there. And so if you're interested in Afani, then go to that page because you're going to get a good deal. You're going to get a discount off. And we really appreciate people like you who are trying to educate people, not only on Bitcoin, because we're big crypto people, but we're data privacy advocates. Our CEO has spoken in front of Congress a couple times, and he's part of a group that tries to fight for all of our rights. And so we appreciate people like you that are out there that are trying to educate people on not only how to make money, but also how to secure themselves with, cold storage wallets and other methods. And it's very key for all of us to make the crypto, to make it successful. We all have to figure out a way to also make it secure.
So if you're listening, also get your Bitcoin off the exchange and into cold storage so you can at least have that little bit of peace of mind. Once you're done with that, go check out Afani and see if you like what you see. But Mark, thanks so much for your time. This was quite illuminating, and I'm going to have to go dig into that most recent Snowflake AT&T hack because I'd heard about the one a few months ago. I hadn't heard about this new one. So gonna have to see what the news is saying about that.
Yeah, definitely. You could probably do, 10-minute clip just on that.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. It's a wild digital frontier that we live in, but at least we've got some tools to keep ourselves safe. So, thanks so much for your time, Mark. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, thank you.
And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net/sponsor. If you are enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast, consider giving this show a 5-star review wherever you listen, or sharing this show with your network. Cut. If you're enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast, consider giving this show a 5-star review wherever you listen, or sharing the show with your friends, family, and strangers on the internet. Or don't, Bitcoin doesn't care, but I always appreciate it. You can find me on Nostr by going to primal.net/walker. If you want to follow the Bitcoin Podcast on Twitter, go to @TitcoinPodcast and @WalkerAmerica. You can also find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com/@WalkerAmerica and @WalkerAmerica on Rumble. Or just go to bitcoinpodcast.net/podcast and find links everywhere. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million, but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, stay free.